Okay, thank you. We'll make a start. Appreciate the break was fairly fleeting, but as you can see, we've got quite a lot to get through. When we decided to look at mental health in sport, one of the things we wanted to achieve were multiple perspectives. So starting with Helen, we had the elite athlete perspective. Jessie moves from the elite athlete into research. But we also felt it was very important to have an association perspective as well. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, and that's Richard Bryan, who is the rugby director from the Rugby Players Association. And he's going to predominantly talk about the Lift the Weight campaign that the RPA put in place in February last year. So I'll hand over to Richard. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, so I'm Richard Bryan, a Rugby Director of the Rugby Players Association, and following in the footsteps of speakers who've been up here already, I feel a little bit daunted, having been a former professional rugby player for 11 years, but having a distinctly average rugby career. So I don't have an awful lot of things to be able to share with you on that front, other than I was a professional rugby player, as I say, for 11 years with the experiences that brought along. I've been retired now for 11 years as well. In fact, I think I've been retired for longer than I was actually playing, which is quite worrying as well. And when I retired, I actually became a lawyer for my sins for approximately 4 years. And I've now been working for the Rugby Players Association for 7 years. And in my role as Rugby Director, I head up and lead on the various welfare programmes that we have in place to support our members. And I thought it'd be useful to talk today around our Lift the Weight campaign to try and explain around some of the mental health issues that our members encounter and that we see, but also why we offer the support that we do and how we support them. And also to provide a few player case studies as well. And today's actually obviously a really, sort of, I guess, poignant day with the government launching their Mental Health and Elite Sport Action Plan. And there is actually a section within that on player associations, which is very interesting. So looking at the available support, best practice, improved education, but from a player association point of view, specifically looking to ensure that the support provided by player associations represents best practice. So the things they've mentioned are the respect of player rights, support and preparation for life after rugby, campaigns to reduce stigma and promote awareness, and also free access to confidential and independent counselling. So I feel like there's almost kind of a tick sheet for me to actually go through there, which is quite interesting. But I think the fact that the government have taken action and recognised the role of player associations is really positive. So I should just give a bit of background around the RPA and the Rugby Players Association and what we actually do. And as you see, it's now our 20th year, and we are an independent trade union. And that's actually a really significant aspect when we talk around independence and the importance of that and the importance of supporting our members. And we have a really broad membership, so representing the rights of over 700 professional players, male and female, and we see our role as being supporting those players from when they enter professional rugby at the age of 18, all the way through to retirement and beyond, because we now have over 400 retired members, and we offer support to those players as well. And I thought it'd be useful just to show you give you a taste of the welfare support that we offer all of those players. So we run what's called our personal development program. You might hear it referred to as performance lifestyle. It has various different terminology around it, but that's our personal development program. And that has 4 main pillars. And that is obviously player welfare, but also education, preparation for the transition to life after rugby, and off-field personal development. And we deliver that program to the 12 elite teams in the Aviva Premiership, the most recently relegated team, England Women's Sevens, England Women's 15s, and the England Men's Sevens. So, and that constitutes those over 700 members. And that program is delivered by our 8 personal development managers. They're the people on the ground, in the clubs, working with those players on and building one-to-one relationships with those players to help deliver those 4 pillars of the personal development program. And we're very lucky we have one of our personal development managers here today, Jake, who's at the back, who will no doubt ask me some difficult questions later, but and might be able to answer some on my behalf as well. But we're very lucky to have those individuals. They're actually key. We talk around mental health support. They are mental health first aiders, and they have a really crucial role in signposting players to the necessary support, not just in relation to mental health, but anything that relates to a player's off-field welfare. But they have a really key role. We also provide a full welfare education program. And when we talk about welfare education, for instance, we've done mental well-being and resilience training. This season, we've rolled out alcohol awareness training. Last year, it was gambling awareness training. And we have a full program there of looking at what areas are relevant and important to our members. And we've also, a big part of our role is around transition. And not just people think about transition perhaps just as retirement, but also as professional sportsmen and women. Transitions are happening all the time, whether you're coming into the professional game, making that big leap from academy status in rugby to first team, and then through your career, hopefully into the England team, and then retirement and beyond. So there's transitions all the way. And to help with that, we have an academy induction day where to introduce the players coming into the professional game and to give them a taste of what professional rugby is about and some of the pitfalls and some of the things they need to be wary of. We also now have the other end of a player's career. We have a transition weekend, and we've started an initiative this season which has been really interesting, of transition talks, where we're bringing back former players who've been retired for a few years to come back to their former clubs and talk to those players about their experiences. They've been fascinating so far, really interesting, and something I can see us developing in the future as well. Just at the bottom, probably the 3 points there at the bottom really go to the core of our support around mental well-being. Since 2008, we have run a confidential counselling service, and we've used the support of Cognacity, or an organisation of psychologists and psychiatrists with a network around the country. And they also provide that service for other player associations as well, so the Professional Cricket Association, League Managers Association as well. And they're absolutely vital to the support we provide. And then we have a 24/7 helpline as well. So players, members, whether retired or current, can access that support through a number of ways. They can either go through the personal development managers, and that's why their role's so key, but they can also go through the helpline. They can be referred by club staff. So there's a number of different entry points into actually seeking that help. And that confidential counselling service is entirely funded by Restart Rugby, which is our official charity. And that charity is there to help with players from a retraining point of view on retirement, for medical support on retirement, and also hardship claims. But one of its key roles, as I say, is funding that confidential counselling. So that's a free service for members when they need to access it. And what I'd like to do is just show you a very short video. So in February last year, we launched our Lift the Weight campaign, and I'll talk more about it. What I thought I'd just do now is, hopefully if it all works, I'll just show you the main promotional video that was released at the time.
I think it's perfectly acceptable to hang up sound struggling, I'm finding it hard.
No, I could walk through it with other people, and it wasn't just my own battle, but it was a battle that others could sort of support me with.
To be a bit isolated and on your own is hard. It's really hard.
Rugby is and was just a shirt you wear, but you are more powerful underneath.
Speak to whoever you need to, just speak, just come out and talk about it.
Everyone has emotions, and it's just sharing that emotion. Like, I've never been so emotional in my life before.
You never realise how much is weighing you down, so actually you get that weight off your shoulders.
The best thing I've ever done as an athlete was to accept I needed to talk.
This is not spin, but I feel a stronger person now, having spoken about it honestly.
Everybody struggles.
There's more pressure on our shoulders than the weights we lift.
You know it's okay to ask for help.
You're not alone.
Spot the signs.
Lift the weight.
Lift the weight. Lift the weight.
Lift the weight. Lift the weight.
Lift the weight.
With physical injuries, we go to the physios. With mental injuries, don't be afraid to get help.
You can access a confidential counselling service 24/7.
Oh, sorry.
I think it is.
Try not to play that again. There we go. So that was a promotional video. I'll talk more about the campaign, and I've got a couple more videos to show you a bit later as well. And but I guess the question is, why did we launch that campaign? Why do we offer the support that we do? And I think the top point is a well-known point that's made that 1 in 4 people in the UK experience a mental health problem every year. And from our point of view, we see professional rugby players as being no different. I guess, I mean, we all know from our various occupations that every occupation carries with it certain stresses and pressures. And but professional sportsmen and women face some pretty unique pressures, both good and bad. And I think that leads to, and we see it as our role to make sure we are there to support them in those times of need. And as you see there, from a confidential counselling service point of view, we've seen 166 referrals to that service over the last 5 years. So really trying to service that need as best we can. That shows the level of referrals we've had to that service year by year. And obviously 2017, in February, we launched Lift the Weight campaign, so no surprise that we saw that increase in referrals at that time. And so far in 2018, it looks like those levels are being sustained. And I think, and also to how we might break that down, so in 2017, that's 58 referrals, 38 from current players, 18 from retired players, and 2 family members as well, who we've supported. And so perhaps no surprise to see that in 2017. You see those quite low referral numbers in 2013, 14 and 15, and I haven't included it, but in 2012 we actually had sort of a mini spike as well in 2012, and I'll talk about why that was in a moment. But as you see, I guess that the campaign came from the thought that, I guess from a player association thinking, the thought process that we all have in player associations is there more we can be doing? It's a question we constantly ask ourselves. And I think around about that period in 2013, 14, 15, those are the questions we were asking ourselves and thinking, should we be doing more? Can we be doing more? And so, and just also then into the main sort of the top 3 presenting problems to the service that we see. Perhaps no massive surprises there in terms of depression being at the top, adjustment disorder, so perhaps coping with retirement, long-term injury, etc., and anxiety and stress. A really interesting point is that we've seen just over the last 2 seasons, a probable trend in younger players accessing the service. So if you'd gone back to a few years ago, the largest category of players seeking support would be over the age of 30. And in the last season and this season, the largest number have been in the 18 to 25-year-olds. So that's something worth bearing in mind, something we're going to look into further as to why that might be. Is it better education at school maybe as they're coming through? Is there more acceptability to talk around mental health issues in younger people? We don't know, but it's just interesting that we're seeing that at the moment. And then what are the kind of, obviously those are the top 3, but what are the kind of issues that we see and that we encounter and that our personal development managers actually experience in working with the players? Now, when thinking of this and thinking of what we encounter, I started off by thinking of it from our current players, but actually a number of these, the majority of these actually have crossover to former players as well. It just might be a slightly different angle on it. But some interesting things in what we actually come across. So depression and anxiety, I mean some of these obviously cross over as well, so perhaps feed into anxiety and stress. But if you look at it from a professional sports person's point of view, selection and performance, for example. Now I guess we all have selection and performance issues in our work in one way or another. But when I talked earlier about the heightened pressures that professional sports people encounter, I guess you only have to look at the England rugby team from the weekend. if you're at that level of game, you're in the spotlight every week. Your performances are played out in front of thousands, tens of thousands, and then obviously millions over TV, and even more millions, I guess, over social media. I should have perhaps put social media as one of these things on here as well, because that's increasingly relevant, I believe. And then if you look at England at the weekend, if you think a few weeks ago those players were world beaters, according to the press, this week, slightly different reaction. Some of those players a few months ago were starting players for the British Lions. If you read in the press, some of those players aren't now worthy of their place for the England team. And those are the kind of heightened pressures that they deal with, played out in front of millions of people. You see that also not just at England level, but at club level as well. So I think that's a really interesting thing to bear in mind when we're talking about players and some of the pressures that they come across. Allied to that, contractual uncertainty. I don't know what contracts you might be on at work, but players are on fixed-term contracts, maybe 1 year contract, maybe a 2 year contract, a 3 year contract. Yes, and in professional rugby, in the Premiership, average salaries are increasing, and the rewards can be great. There's also a very short career, and there's a lot of uncertainty. One of the worst questions I always get asked is about 5-year plans and what your plans for 5 years, any interview question, because I still think like a rugby player. I still go from year to year and consider myself to be pretty lucky to be in the job from year to year. Pretty pessimistic outlook, but I think that goes back to my very average rugby career. But that contractual uncertainty, and we're right in that period now. So we're in March. Most of the players would have had their contracts re-signed by now, I say most, but if you're in March, April time, and your contract hasn't been renewed, this is a worrying time. So I would expect our referrals to the Confidential Counselling Service to be increasing at this time of year. Allied to that, obviously, things that you'll see with any athletes, long-term injury, and also the transitional concerns, future career worry. So players, I think there's quite a lot of sometimes bravado around players and in their current situation and thinking around their current career. But underlying that, there's always that concern about what next. I was pretty blasé about it myself. I'd done the qualifications to become a lawyer. I knew what I was going to do. So help was available, but I didn't really take it because I didn't need it. And then I retired through injury, and then that next day, or a few weeks later, you start work. And I started work as a trainee lawyer. And what a wake-up call that was. And immediately I realised I had not done enough work experience. I could be the most qualified trainee solicitor in the world, but if you haven't done work experience and know what that environment's like, goodness me, what a wake-up call that was. It's probably no surprise that 4 years later I left the sort of commercial law firm to go and join the Rugby Players Association, because it was so different, and you just see that now, and that's one of the big messages we get across to players as much as possible, that preparation, really understanding what you're trying to go into. And I think it does lead to a lot of stress amongst players. And not only around that, but obviously coping with retirement as well. And we see that on the other side. I've got some research for you coming up on past players and some of the things that we find with them. But also from players, if you think of unemployment, financial worries and bankruptcy. We don't see bankruptcy so much within current players, but there are players with financial worries, current players, but certainly for retired players, that becomes an issue as well. Anger management, relationship and family issues, and unfortunately suicide risk. We have lost players to taking their own lives, and the same in other sports as well. And that is something that is always there, and I guess always is at the forefront of our thinking. I should actually add as well, I knew I was going to forget this point. I actually told them I was going to forget this point, but I've remembered it. We're actually doing some research, some pretty interesting research at the moment with Cardiff Metropolitan University, and the chaps are here, Steve and Paul, and we're actually looking at the psychological stresses that players undergo throughout the course of the season, so the demands that they're put under during the course of the season. And that is research that is backed fully by the RFU and the Premiership Rugby, who are the umbrella organisation for professional clubs in England, and we're doing that throughout this season and next season. And we're trying to look at, say, the demands that they're placed under, but also the coping strategies and coping resources that are in place to help those players as well. So we're hoping to take up some really good research from that, because it is an area actually where there isn't a lot of research, and we hope to help sort of understand our players a lot better. I'm just going to take you through our first case study. I'm going to take you back in time to 2012. If you remember, I said that there was another bar off that graph I showed you earlier from 2012 when there was kind of a mini spike. And my first case study is Duncan Bell. Duncan Bell, you may recall, was an England player, Bath legend, possibly a Bath legend. I went to school with Dunk, so I know him well. And Duncan, I was working at the time as a personal development manager, not my current role, as personal development manager with Bath, working in that environment. And Duncan came to me in 2012 and said, there's something I need your help with, I think. He said, I've done an interview with the Telegraph that's going out in a couple of days' time, and in it I talk around my battle with depression for the last 10 years, which came as something as a surprise to me because I didn't know about it. The number of people he spoke to was actually really, really small. But he wanted to speak about it. And that was a huge moment on a number of levels, because he decided that also it'd be a good thing to use more generally. So what we helped him with is we actually filmed him telling the squad, the Bath Rugby squad, about his battles with depression for the previous 10 years and revealing it to them. Allowed us to film that and allowed us to use that as a bit of a promotional video to show around for players at other clubs. Really, really useful. Really useful. And then he was, I think he was certainly that I can recall, the first real English professional rugby player to talk in depth around his battles with depression. A really significant moment. And unsurprisingly, on the back of that, we saw a significant increase in the number of referrals to our counselling service. The other interesting thing, which was really relevant for us later, was that by putting himself out there, the reaction he got, which was overwhelmingly positive, but he also got an awful lot of people contacting him over social media, asking him questions, asking him about where to go for support, not just rugby, but the wider public as well, which was really interesting. So we were helping him with that as well. So he really is something of a pioneer for us, because he was the person out there talking about it. But I don't think we harnessed that enough, because it was a spike, and then it kind of fell away, and the conversations around it fell away a little bit. Duncan was still talking about it, but we didn't really harness that, the talking that was happening at the time. So that was something we learned, and from that point we were thinking we need to be putting a campaign in place, something that's got greater sustainability to normalise the conversation around mental health, if that's the right expression. And we were actually looking at some of the other player associations, because we were actually quite behind by comparison, I think, because there was a lot of good work being done by other player associations. Professional Cricketers Association with Mind Matters series, which you can still see on their website. Tackle Your Feelings from Rugby Players Ireland, State of Mind in Rugby League, and I personally think the best one of them all, which is the Gaelic Player Association We Wear More campaign. And I do go and have a look at it online. It's a really simple video, very visual, made by the players, for the players. All these things have in common with players talking about their own situations. But that's really, really powerful. So I would recommend you go and have a look at those. But we thought we have to do something similar, because the question is, what's happening in English Rugby Union? What is happening in other sports? And obviously here Jesse saying earlier about Irish sport not having an awful lot in terms of, from the mental health point of view. Actually, two of their player associations were really leading campaigns. But we were asking the question, well, what's happening in English Rugby Union? And we didn't think there was an awful lot. So that was a real kind of, for us, thinking, well, we need to be getting something that's much more sustainable. You've heard quite a lot already today about the obstacles that are in place as well for players seeking support, and that was something we wanted to tackle. And I think that one of the most, and we talk about, there's obviously a lot's been said already about stigma, and I think one of the things that we notice, obviously, rugby is a hard sport. It's a hard sport physically, It's a hard sport to be talking about mental toughness. You accept all that. But that does not make rugby players immune from mental illness. But it might be a barrier to them talking about it. So that was very much in our consciousness when we're putting a campaign together about this whole idea of, well, it's a sign of weakness. I remember I've heard it from a few years ago, not so much recently, but a few years ago, I was aware of a case where a young player had a couple of those issues that we saw on the screen now. Issues at home, dependency issues. I didn't actually talk about dependency issues on that screen. So we see dependency issues in relation to potentially gambling, in relation to painkiller usage, in relation to a number of different issues potentially. For instance, professional rugby players are 3 times more likely to develop problems with gambling than the general public, for example, potentially due to their more competitive nature, and those are things that we're very aware of. Anyway, this player had some dependency issues, some issues at home, and he went to seek some support from a club member of staff. He didn't let on the exact detail of what he was suffering with, but he was told, yeah, well, there's no place for the weak-minded at this club. And I don't draw any conclusions from that or any judgments from that. It was a long time ago, and I think the club in question would be a lot different now. But it really did kind of sense, and what actually happened is that player then didn't reach out for any support at all. And until such time as he had his situation descended and got worse and worse and worse. And the outcome was, I mean, eventually we were able to get him the support he needed. And thankfully, he's in a lot better place, in a really good place now. But to have to go through that just feels completely wrong. So those are kind of obstacles that we quite often see. In terms of the idea that there's a sign of weakness maybe, or perhaps pride, or the stigma and embarrassment. The 2 points at the bottom are really interesting from our point of view, from a player association. The importance of confidentiality and trust. They are absolutely key. That's why for us having those independent personal development managers in the clubs are absolutely crucial. In many respects, it doesn't matter to us where players go for support, as long as they get that support and it's the right support. But for us, that's why we have those personal development managers on the floor in the clubs doing their role. It might be that a player feels more comfortable going to see a club doctor to get support, but there could be some issues there. Well, actually, they're an employee of the club. Is what I'm going to say going to be confidential? Well, of course it is, but from a player's perception, that might be somewhat different. Can they go and speak to a member of the club staff? And actually, we have to think about it from when we're doing the confidential counselling service. Well, will they be comfortable speaking to a stranger? Will they want to pick up a phone? So we try and give them as many options as possible to seek that support. But confidentiality and trust is absolutely key. And really, as you say, from that case I just discussed earlier, when mental health is not acknowledged or talked about, I think that's when we have the problem, when things go underground. So we want there to be a conversation around mental health, and that's what we wanted to do with our campaign. I'm just going to talk around a second case study. Excuse me. A second case study, whereas Duncan's case in the public domain and another case I'm going to talk about was in the public domain, this one was not. It was around the time that we were making progress with our campaign and putting it together, because the one thing I do remember from being a lawyer is the scariest thing of being a lawyer is when you have a blank piece of paper and you have to start from scratch, and that's what we were doing with our Lift the Weight campaign. Although there were other ideas around it, we didn't want to copy ideas, we wanted our idea of what we were going to do, and that blank piece of paper was pretty scary, but we were making progress. And then myself and one of the leaders of the Lift the Weight campaign, a senior personal development manager called Caroline Guthrie, she and I were called out to meet this player who was over 40, been retired for just over 10 years, wife and children, in employment but low paid, absolutely crippling financial problems and debt, crippling, and a real feeling of worthlessness and being a drain on his family. I have to say that was one of the hardest, no, it was not one of, it was the hardest meeting I've ever been involved in from the RPA. Because there was a player in front of us who was absolutely at rock bottom, and he was a religious man, and he had contemplated suicide as a way out, and told us about that, and we are in the room listening to him. And he said, I think that God's answered my prayers because he sent you two, and you're going to help me to get over this. And that was an incredibly powerful moment, both from the responsibility we suddenly felt, but also the fact that he had opened up and was seeking that support. We were able to provide him with the support he needed. He is now doing well and thriving, and we're just so glad that he reached out and we were able to support him the way we were. But it shouldn't be like that. You shouldn't have to be at rock bottom, I guess, before we want to make those interventions earlier. And there was a great sense of, he's a very proud man as well. And I think that was perhaps at the core of why not perhaps coming to us earlier. But that really resonated with us as well. A, we need to get this campaign out there, and really, B, we want to make sure that people are accessing support as soon as possible. And that actually brings me on to past players. We have recently carried out some past player research, and we've done it in conjunction with Professional Players Federation, which is the umbrella organisation for player associations. And so similar studies were carried out in football and in cricket, and some of the statistics were featured in the BBC's recent State of Sport series on transition. And so these are some of the statistics that in relation to our past players and what they're reporting back to us. And as you can see, some of them are pretty stark. The top one speaks for itself. 63% reported mental health issues since retirement. And when I talk to other former players about that and ask them about that statistic, they're not surprised by it. So that's the level of what we're talking about amongst retired players. Perhaps allied to that, only 30% chose when to retire, 52% retired due to injury or physical impairment. Over 50% took 2 years or longer to be in control of their lives after retirement. I can certainly resonate, we can sort of understand that. In my case, it didn't help that I went down the wrong profession potentially, and it was only, funny in my case, it's probably only later that you look back and then realise that that's the case. So some interesting statistics there. 46% faced financial difficulty within 5 years as well, which goes back to my earlier case study. But interestingly as well, at the bottom, these are quite important points as well. Actually, 72% are satisfied with their overall health, and 75% with their current careers. So I think there is an element of transition and retirement, and getting used to that actually takes time, but you need that support as well. So why did we run a campaign? So I think most of these we've covered already, but actually the bottom 2 points are actually crucial. Is we realised through a number of things that players listen to other players, and that underpins a lot of the work we do. So we wanted to get that. We needed to get players talking about this issue, or more of them. And we wanted also, originally it was just going to be a campaign for our members, but we realised that actually it probably resonate with the wider rugby community and the wider public. And so we wanted something that would actually reach those kind of targets as well. And so this was our idea. It was this is what our campaign was going to be. The short video that you've seen, an online hub for resources, which is in place with various videos where players, our members, but also members of the general public should go for support, talking around those different areas of transition, injury, relationships, behaviours, depression, anxiety and stress. And 9 players sharing their stories. That sounds quite simple, but when we came to put all this together and we thought, right, we need players to talk about this, we only had one player, and that was Duncan Bell, again, so who was part of the campaign again this time. But he was the only one, and so we had to go out there and think, we have to find these players who are willing to talk around this. And that proved to be quite difficult, but actually what we did is went back to our team of personal development managers and asked them, can we find who players might be willing to talk publicly for the greater good of the members around their experiences. And we were lucky enough to find, not just these, but more players came forward than this, but these were 9 players who we ran with, who spoke so brilliantly about the issues they face and other people face. So Duncan Bell, James Haskell, John O'Kitto, Danielle Waterman, Kane Palmer, Newport around the corner, Johnny Wilkinson, who you might remember, Ollie Phillips, Natani Talai, and Matt Hankin, and all spoke brilliantly around different issues that they or people close to them had faced. And when we launched the campaign, I have another video. I have two videos, but I might just only have time to show one. This is an example of some of the resources that we now have available, and you can go and see them if you wish on our website. This is a video featuring John O'Kitto, who was at Leicester. He was at Harlequins recently, but has recently left Harlequins.
I became, I think very quickly as well, suicidal. I'd wake up in the morning and be devastated that I woke up, and not sort of know how I was going to get through the day, and feel like my whole day was just basically trying to fight my own head. I very, very, very much wanted to die and to not live anymore, because of the reality was that I felt like my life was going to be like that for the rest of my life. I didn't feel any sense of hope that things were going to get better, and I remember just sort of being dragged into my parents' room one night, and I'd say, oh yeah, I'm doing okay, not as great as I have been in the past, and they're like, yeah, we can sort of tell. And then I sort of started to break down and said, actually, if I was honest, I'm doing terrible. I'm not sure that I want to be alive anymore. And it was really tough because I didn't want to admit that I was struggling. I didn't know what that would mean for me as a male and my identity. But I got to a place where I was desperate and I felt like I had no choice. And as soon as I had the conversation, I felt like all of a sudden I had a little bit of a weight lifted off my shoulders in that sense, because now I could walk through it with other people, and it wasn't just my own battle, but it was a battle that others could sort of support me with and walk through it with me. And I was very good at operating, say, in my university or rugby circles as if everything was okay, but it was an effort to put that facade up. And so when I'd get home, that it would come down because I felt comfortable, I didn't feel as vulnerable. And so my family obviously were the ones that would notice the signs immediately. 2 years down the track, I was healthy again. And so in one sense, I probably was able to do that, but at the same time, it would have been a lot easier had I actually gone to the doctor, taken some medication to help with the scientific side of what was going on as well. And it was only when I started to have these conversations with other people and actually realised that people had exactly the same experiences as of what I was having, that I began to realise perhaps it's not as shameful, it's not as isolating, it's not as abnormal as perhaps I thought it was. And that in itself brought hope, because I looked at these people and thought, wow, they've come through it, perhaps I can too, and they've come through it, and I look at them with respect, and with nothing but respect and admiration for their ability to persevere and be resilient through a really tough time. I don't look at them and think less of a man or less of a woman, less of a person, or any sense of stigma attached to what they've been through. So maybe that's the same for me, yeah.
That's probably the most hard-hitting video of them all, of Jono being so absolutely sort of honest about his depression and thoughts of taking his own life. And I think that a lot of the topics he spoke about there about identity, the importance of actually seeking help and talking it through, was so powerful for our members. I think I've got time for one more video. And a little bit afterwards, I've got one more. Let's just have a look. So this is just one of the other ones that we did. No. So this is Danielle Waterman, who recently featured for the England women's team in the Six Nations.
One of the hardest things about being injured is the fact that you don't get to do what you love to do. You're not on the field on a daily basis, chucking a ball about with your friends. You're not being able to play on a weekend or during the week. And so you do feel excluded from the team as much as you are part of it. And the biggest part for me was the fact that I was over in a rehab unit completely separate away from my team. But I wanted that separation because I felt like I needed to deal with the physical and the mental components of the injury I had. At the same time, I did feel really lonely because the best bit about rugby is that you're playing with your teammates, and they are mates and they're friends. So yeah, it's a hard one because it's a struggle between wanting to be part of the team but not feeling part of the team. So you've got that constant battle between yourself, and you just slowly, for me, I slowly slipped further and further away from feeling part of it. No matter how hard the management or the team worked to keep me involved, I built up a barrier that got higher and higher and higher. So for me, my injury took a real bad turn. I had a reconstruction to my MCL ligament, and it didn't go to plan. I needed a second operation, and it went worse before we could even see getting back to running, let alone playing rugby. I had to rehab 5 times a day, 7 days a week, and I still wasn't seeing improvement. The improvement wasn't because of the physical work I was putting in, but it was because mentally I wasn't switched on. I wasn't happy. I was really low about where I was at. I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. Although I was convincing everybody else that I was okay, actually I wasn't. I didn't want to get out of bed in the mornings. I met with a doctor that didn't know me, and he was doing my physical assessment. And when he was talking to me about where I was at, I was crying, but yet I was smiling. And he said, you're showing me one emotion, but you're hiding it with something else. And it was at that point that I realised that actually I wasn't okay. And we had a big discussion around, as much as I could physically put the work in, it was never going to be as effective as it could be if mentally I wasn't actually there. And a big part of me as a player was always mind over matter. Being a small player, if I had it in my mind and I could, and I believed in myself, then it wouldn't matter how small it was, it wouldn't matter how tired I was, I would keep going. And at that point, my mind was the bit that was stopping me. And so therefore, no matter what I was going to do, I was never gonna get myself back playing. I told some of my closest family and a couple of my closest teammates, but I was quite embarrassed to say that I'd got what was classed as a mental health issue, because it was just the fact that I was feeling low. I was feeling down about the fact that I was injured. It was a difficult time, and it was on the back of a difficult 5-6 years. But you always think that there's someone else that's worse, and you don't deserve to feel sad about a knee injury. But I think as time went on, I learned to accept that actually it was the injury that was affecting me. I can hand on heart say that without having help from the RPA to go and see Cognoscity and work with the team there, I wouldn't have got back playing rugby.
So again, really, really honest, players being extremely honest about the issues they faced and how they sought help for it. And they're really powerful messages that we were able to put out to our membership and wider, because when we launched Lift the Weight, it got featured in all these different media organisations. The Sunday Times referred to it as possibly the most important work we'd ever done as a player association. We had the video was viewed 700,000 times on social media. There were over 150 articles in relation to the campaign. It had a reach of 35 million people. So it had a big impact. And what was really encouraging was it wasn't just about the players who were talking in the videos about it. The players started to talk about it on social media as well. Our own, he's now our chairman, Mark Lambert, but also Jacques Berger down the bottom left there. If you needed, a personification of the hardest rugby player you can think of, it's him. He's Namibian, retired now, Namibian international. Played for Saracens, won everything there is to win in the game, and then on the back of the Lift the Weight campaign, felt able to actually talk publicly around his own experiences. So that was really powerful as well. And obviously we had an increase in referrals to our support service. So in the couple of months leading up to the launch, we had, I think it was 3 referrals to the confidential counselling service. In the 2 months after it was 18. The key then is trying to sustain that, or trying to sustain that level of support. My final piece is the final case study, and this again was in the public domain, and it's kind of the postscript, if you like. Dan Mugford was a player at Sale Sharks last year, and whilst he was there, he was struggling with performance issues and pressure he was putting on himself. He got dropped from the team, was having some relationship issues as well, and then lost his contract. and in the summer attempted to take his own life. He reached out to us. We were able to assist and help, and he was then felt able to talk publicly about it as well, and to encourage other players to do the same, to talk about it and reach out for help when they needed it. And I think just from that, it just indicates how important the role of the support for the professional athlete in this area is, how important the role of the Player Association is in offering that support, and our absolute commitment in ensuring that we continue with it as well. What's next? We keep going. I'm very short. Thank you very much for your time. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Richard. Any questions?
Richard. Thanks very much. It strikes me thus far that there is some consistency about being brave and fierce on the pitch, on the track, on the field. And it's about, I think, or I don't know your perspective on it, about a holistic approach, about being able to be brave and fierce off the pitch or the track or the field, and being able to tackle whatever needs to be tackled in that same brave and fierce way, and a more holistic approach. What are your views on that, please?
Yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely. I think I think I'd take a point that Jesse made earlier, is it doesn't seem right to talk around sort of bravery to have to talk around these issues. We'd rather it's kind of part of the normal conversation. But perhaps we're not there yet, and it needs, because I say, when we looked, we had Duncan Bell to talk around about this issue, and we thought, well, who else can we get? And there was no one immediately obvious. Actually, probably not quite true, because Johnny Wilkinson had spoken publicly about some things he had gone through when playing and the pressures he'd put on himself to perform. Yeah, we want to get to a point where you don't have to be brave to do it, or be considered brave to do it. I think one of the problems with that is that within that team environment, with that, you know, there's still that you can't show weakness. You can't, and it's kind of linked to weakness as opposed to illness. That's my concern around it, is we need to be able to normalise things and normalise that conversation. And it doesn't, just because perhaps you're suffering from mental illness, that doesn't affect what you're able to do on the pitch.
Thank you. Keep up with
Yeah.
No, thank you for that. It was really refreshing to see something's in place for such a male-dominated sport. I'm hoping you can answer this question. I was wondering if anything similar, not precisely exactly what you've got going on for players, if there's anything similar going on for maybe rugby union coaches or referees, because, I mean, I think previously one of the speakers spoke about that the highest percentage of someone to turn to for players is a coach. But then what do you do if their mental health literacy isn't up to date, I guess, or if they don't know how to deal with it?
Well, I think interesting that's been referenced in the government's action plan today around because they're so important as part of that network, and I guess coaches' response to when a player needs help can be very different, can be really positive or not, and that can have a massive effect. So bringing them into the picture is actually really, really important, I think. And we are encouraging, all of the welfare education we do and provide, we encourage coaches to come into that if we're doing a face-to-face session, or to make sure they're getting all the materials as well, because it's absolutely vitally important. So I take your point. In terms of what we do for professional rugby coaches, there's not an organisation in place for that. I think there should be. There is the League Managers Association in football, but rugby, talk around the stresses and strains on the players after the weekend. Look at some of the things that have been directed in the way of the coaches, just from a kind of a public point of view. I think they need that support as well, and we have supported coaches who are former players who've come to us facing some of those issues. So absolutely, I think there's an absolute need there.
I think we've got time for one more.
Hi, thanks very much, Richard. We talked about some addiction issues there. What does the RPA, what sort of stance do you guys take with regards to the steroid use and cocaine use within the people you work for, effectively? Because it's obviously slightly different from the alcohol culture, and gambling may or may not be almost acceptable now.
You say that. I think you talked around steroids. We have an elected body of players from each club, and they've always taken a very strong anti-doping stance, because when we talk about anti-doping issues, it's quite often what frustrates our membership is that there's quite often headlines you'll read that rugby has a problem with rugby union has a problem with doping issues, and if you look at it in detail, it's actually there's more of a societal issue at some of the lower levels of the game. Yet everyone gets thrown in that mix. There's got to be, just look at them, look at the size of them, look at the power, and that frustrates our members quite a lot. So very, very strongly supportive of the anti-doping education and programs that are in place with the RFU as well. I think there's a separate program in place run by the RFU, which we're supportive of as well, which is called an illicit drug testing program. Sorry, I won't get in too much detail on this, but there's an anti-doping testing program for in competition, but out of competition, there's in the Premiership there's an illicit drug testing scheme, and the idea of that is slightly different. Rather than going straight to sanction, if you're tested under that scheme and you fail that, it's kept anonymous, it's kept confidential, and the first thing is the player is fined, but they don't have any further sanction against them. They're actually put into rehabilitate a program of counselling to help them. And so when you talk about cocaine and illicit drug usage, there's a slightly different reference there, because actually what we found with some of those cases of perhaps cocaine usage, actually some of the underlying issues are actually more mental health related issues. So I think the sport and cricket's followed suit actually. So I think the sport can actually be quite proud of its stance on that, and actually taking a slightly different angle on illicit drug usage.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Are you staying for lunch?
Yes.
In which case I'm sure Richard would be happy to answer any other questions over lunch.